This is the Recap Episode, a weekly podcast about exploring and analyzing reality TV season by season. I'm your host, Walker, and I use my social science background to investigate reality TV shows to uncover what they have to say about their cast, as well as the experiences of the people who made the shows themselves. I like to cover fan favorite shows, but also expose myself and my audience to shows we've never heard of. In this episode, I'm finally finishing watching and covering one of my favorite shows of all time, MTV's The Osbournes, a documentary, docuseries style show that really was the first of its kind that followed the family life of Black Sabbath rocker Ozzy Osbourne and his chaotic family through their many misadventures and dysfunctionality. In this episode, I am covering Season 4, which is the last season of the show, although I'm pretty sure in the UK it was called Series 5. If you want to hear more about that, go listen to my previous episodes and hear me talk about Season 2 and Season 3 and the weird naming discrepancy. For some brief history, just in case this is your first time encountering the show and my podcast, The Osbournes started airing in 2002. It was a docuseries style show, like I mentioned, that put cameras in the homes and followed the family members of the Osbournes family around their daily lives for 3 years to film the entire show for 4 seasons. We didn't get the entire family. We focused primarily on 4 of the 5 of Sharon and Ozzy's family. So, of course, we had Ozzy Osbourne himself, the Prince of Darkness. We have his wife, Sharon Osbourne, who has worked as a manager to Ozzy and many other bands. And at this point in the show, she's actually also, or this is during when Sharon was working on her talk show. We also follow 2 of Sharon and Ozzy's 3 children, the younger 2, Kelly Osbourne and Jack Osbourne. When we started the show in Season 1, Kelly and Jack were 16 and 15 respectively. And in this Season 4, they are 19 and 18, 20-ish, 19-ish. The timeline's a little wibbly-wobbly at this point. Every now and then we see some other people that pop up, other members of the family friends, various assistants, and people who are close to and associated with the Osbournes, and they played their roles, but they're not as prevalent as the main 4, who we just follow and see what they do. There's enough interesting things happening, usually with those 4, to make an interesting show. As I've discussed in my other episodes where I cover the show, this really was the first of its kind, this kind of following celebrities format that would later become very popular and very famous. And as many people have pointed out, the Osbournes is a direct line to eventually Kardashians shows and whatnot. But when MTV was making the show at the time, if The Real World was an attempt to make an unscripted soap drama show, The Osbournes was a bit of an attempt to make an unscripted sitcom, particularly like a comedic one. The people who were making the show, they collected all this footage by just having a camera crew always be around the family, both at the house and then going with them wherever they may be going to. And then they chopped it up and edited it and stuck it together, collaged it, hodgepodged it into these episodes where there's no real sense of chronology. They're kind of just picking things that pertain to a central 1 or 2 plots for an episode and telling us a story from there. Even if the story spreads over multiple days or weeks or months, they're going to chop it up and piece it together to tell us that story in a nice, tight 20-22 minutes. This does mean that it's kind of hard to figure out what's happening with the Osbournes in some sort of coherent timeline. For me, that just makes it kind of fun. It's like a little mystery, being like, wait, when did this happen? What's going on? But it does also something I just wanted to mention, and to remind like myself as I'm watching, but also you all as you listen to me ramble about this show, that the show was made to be like entertaining and comedic first. That was the goal of the producers and the editors on this show. And then one of the things that I like to point out is, as a side effect, as a consequence, this show ended up really opening the closed doors of the Osbourne family and showing that this high-profile celebrity family with these big personalities really is no different than any other family that may be watching this show. and they may see themselves in them, in the Osbourne family, in some fashion. And to me, that's what makes it an enjoyable show, and one of my favorites. Is not only do I have memories of watching it a long time ago, and now that I'm rewatching it and actually watching the whole thing, I'm like, okay, this is fun. Or so I thought. I'll get into that in a little bit. But it's also just a neat kind of like pastiche at like what is family life, and how do we put that on TV, and what is family life for celebrities. And this family finally lets us capture that. Now, I said season 3 was a bit of a nothing burger, especially compared to seasons 1 and 2. It kind of felt like it fell off. And honestly, season 4 did that, but even worse. It was still... I watched it. It wasn't as entertaining as the earlier stuff from the show, but I got through it. Which is, that's kind of the sign in itself, that I had to say I got through it. Instead of like, I was excited to watch every episode. Each episode in this season kind of felt like, okay... So with that being said, let me get into this recap and cover what happened in this 4th season. I will say, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of stuff that was connected to previous seasons. For example, in season 3, I think we got a minor update on the Kelly and Christina Aguilera feud, and there were a few other connections to other things. The only thing that you really would want to know about the previous seasons, or about like the family events going into this season, is that Sharon has a talk show still at this point, and everything else is kind of pretty much fine. I think there's some footage of Ozzy in his neck brace from the injury that was shown halfway through season 3, but that just is more of a sign of they filmed all of the stuff for season 3 and 4 mostly in the same block of time with the family and production, and then they cut up all that footage into 2 seasons, which I think is what made these seasons kind of boring, and I'll get into that later. But we had 10 episodes again. This season aired in 2005. We started January 16th, and we aired weekly until March 20th, which is the final episode of the series. So, episode 1 is called Sleepless in Beverly Hills. There's 2 plots for this episode, as there usually are. We get kind of an A plot, B plot kind of thing going on. Our main plot is Ozzy is having trouble sleeping, got some horrible insomnia, and we're kind of with him for most of the episode trying to figure out what's going on, kind of seeing him just miserable. There's a lot of, in this show, Ozzy's miserable, and we're going to watch, like when he injures himself and he can't do what he wants to do. But in this one, he's just not getting enough sleep, and he's trying to figure out why. He's trying all these remedies. Nothing's working. We're shown some nice foreshadowing, because we're shown this giant, like, cappuccino cup, like one of those round mugs that he is drinking truly probably a coffee pot amount of coffee out of, like, every day. And it turns out he goes for a sleep study, or someone comes to the house to do a sleep study on him. One where they hook up all the sensors to you and whatnot. And afterwards, the doctor informs Ozzy, it's like, oh, the problem is you're allergic to coffee. So just cut back on the coffee and your sleep will be fine. It's kind of unclear if that actually fixed it, because the episode just kind of ends. But that's the first episode. The only other plot was Jack went and got his 8th tattoo, which was a cross on his chest. Some female friend of his hung around for it. Not sure who that is. I don't think I ever saw her ever again. And he got another tattoo. And then, of course, we had a moment where Sharon was like, well, I don't hate the design. I just hate where you put it. She would have preferred it to be on his back. Sharon is, like, I will say it, known in the series for, like, not wanting her kids to do any body modification at all. No tattoos, no piercings. Ozzy even is against the tattoos. But I think more from a point of, like, wait till you're older and your brain is more developed kind of thing, because Ozzy has his own. And that's episode 1, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like the whole episode is about Ozzy not getting enough sleep and Jack getting a tattoo. And of course the, editing team, props to them. They made it entertaining to an extent at least, but it's kind of like, oh, that's what we're working with? Okay. And the second episode, honestly, is even... there's a couple episodes in this season where I'm like, what? Why am I watching this? Why did they make an episode out of this? Episode 2 is called Have Oz Will Travel. We finally got to see Kelly. I don't think we saw her at all in the first episode. I even have a note. I was like, oh, Kelly's here. Wow. The family is trying to plan a vacation trip. They want to go somewhere. They don't know where they want to go. It's the focus of this episode for most of the family, except for Kelly. They've been to all these places. Ozzy has a lot of, resistance to most of the places the other family members are suggesting because he's been there before and he doesn't like them. For example, he says that Tahiti is basically just a polluted Hawaii. I think Ozzy at one point does decide to go to Fiji. He's like, let's go to Fiji. Sharon, unfortunately, she has to stay in only a 5-star hotel. She cannot go any lower in terms of luxury and quality, and Fiji doesn't have a 5-star hotel. So Fiji's out. And then that's the episode for them. They're just kind of figuring out where they're going to go on vacation. Someone pitches an idea, and someone else in the family is like, nope, don't like it. They do ultimately, at the end of the episode, just decide to go to Hawaii. Most of the family kind of just lands on that. Sharon for primarily, and Ozzy just has to go along. Kelly does have her own more interesting plot in this episode. She's been breaking out into the acting world more at this point in her life and in the timeline of the family history and the chronology. And she's been auditioning for roles and getting things from people to read. Here's a script. Are you interested? She does an audition, and she actually lands the part in what later would become known as Life as We Know It. And she has that role in that show for its run. At the time, it was still called Doing It, or maybe that was just the pre-production working title, because that is what the book that the show Life as We Know It is based on called. It's called Doing It. So Kelly gets the part. It's very exciting. Unfortunately, Kelly has to start rehearsals a week later, or 2 weeks later. So she does not get to go to Hawaii with the rest of the family. Kelly has to go to Canada instead to start doing rehearsals for this part she got. And that's episode 2. Again, this is what's interesting. Is the family arguing about where they should go on vacation? Episode 3, they do finally go to Hawaii. We tag along with them. So, of course, we only see Kelly for, the very beginning of the episode. And maybe a little bit at the end. This is also the only time we ever got, a previously on the Osbournes. I don't remember hearing a little narrative quip like that in any of the episodes before. That was weird. So, Sharon, Ozzy, of course. Jack goes on the trip. Sam, that's Ozzy's bodyguard and friend. I think Melinda went with them. That's Sharon's assistant and used to be the family nanny assistant. And then Jack also brought 2 of his friends along, 2 or 3, who are gross, cringy, creepy assholes who are just causing trouble the whole time. Everyone's trying to relax and they're having to keep tabs on Jack's weird friends. And I call them weird friends and gross and cringy because that's all they do. All the footage we get of them, and then of course Jack by association because he's with them, is them just being creepy to local women of Hawaii. I think they went to a strip club and then convinced and or paid to convince some of the women who worked there to hang out with them for a bunch of other things and bring these women around to all the other events. And of course Sharon and Ozzy and Sam and Melinda are cool, great, awesome, this is wonderful. And they're just kind of making assholes of themselves the whole time. Ozzy and Sharon do end up enjoying themselves. There was actually kind of a cute moment where Ozzy and Sharon go to tour the USS Missouri. The crew presents Ozzy with an admiral's hat, and they make a point to mention that the previous person who got an admiral's hat, which is a very special gift, was President Bush. This is 2005, so filmed in 2004, I should say. Ozzy loves it. He's so excited. He's I must have seen that ship on the History Channel so many times because Ozzy's a big history and war buff. Sharon is just kind of tagged along, and there's clips every now and then of Ozzy being amazed as he hears an explanation about some sort of inner workings of the vessel, and Sharon's just kind of there, just sort of staring around, a little absent-minded. At the end of the episode, they're trying to pack everything up, getting ready to leave Hawaii, and they can't find Jack's friends, and they got to go to the airport. They got to get going, and so they just decide to leave his friends there. Which, great. Karma. And honestly, for what it's worth, a good self-contained story. you kind of like that in a show like this, where it's serial because you're following the same people the whole time, and they do have some continuous stories, but it's episodic because each episode tends to kind of be a different thing. Having a self-contained story like that, especially like with the friends, and like you see their behavior and then you see their comeuppance, that's nice, and that's like fun for the watchers. Nice when a story has a resolution. Episode 4 is called Kelly Interrupted. 4 and 5 do go hand in hand. They connect to each other. You could watch them as like a two-parter if you wanted to. They did this for season 3 as well, when Ozzy had his ATV accident that almost killed him. And we had one episode that led up to the accident, and then the second episode right after it was Ozzy recovering and us with him while he was getting better. And so we have the same thing here. Kelly Interrupted, we start with normalcy and we move into something new and dramatic. And then in episode 5, we will sort of get somewhat of a resolution or a change in the normal experience for the person at the focus of these experiences. So in season 3, that was Ozzy getting injured and him having to adapt. In season 4, now it's Kelly. So episode 4, Kelly Interrupted. We start with Kelly talks to Melinda about getting a lip piercing, and Melinda tries to dissuade her because we all know how Sharon's going to react. This is immediately cut with Jack and Sharon just hanging out, and Jack goes, you know, Kelly doesn't really make good choices for herself, and they're talking about it. And this is where Jack first plants the seed, and he says he thinks that Kelly's on drugs. Kelly comes back with a huge lip ring. There's a big reveal. Jack is the first one she shows it, and he's legitimately just like stunned, and he's like, what is that? It's a huge lip ring. Jack, you know, props to him for reacting somewhat tactfully. He just goes, okay, there's some drasticness going on here, but I can dig it. Which, as someone with siblings myself, but I'm the oldest, that's sometimes just how you have to react, where you want to show like, okay, I support you, but I don't know if I want to fully put myself in your side for the future argument that's going to happen. Jack immediately goes to chat with Sharon and Ozzy about the lip ring, and while they're talking, Sharon suddenly comes up with something that like surprised me, and she goes, oh, this has to do with Sarah. Now Sarah we haven't seen since season 2. Sarah's one of Kelly's friends. She had a couple episodes, one with her one focused on her, and she was kind of around for some other events in season 2 where she's a bit of a troublemaker, a little bit of an instigator, and Sharon's perspective, a bad influence on Kelly. Sharon says this behavior has to do with Sarah. Ozzy is now chiming in, and he also is saying the same thing that Jack is saying. Like, no, this behavior, maybe it's Sarah who pushed her this way a little bit, but this is the result of drugs. Sharon, of course, doesn't want to hear it. She's denying it. Jack, this whole family has great one-liners when they ever come up. Jack is like, I'm glad I'm not the problem child anymore. Direct quote. Sharon goes to confront Kelly on the lip ring, and then she also confronts Kelly on writing a check for $1,000 for her friend Fred, which is suspicious to say the least. Kelly passes it off and saying that her and Fred have joined some new gym, and that's like the membership fee or something like that. Sarah is around for one shot in this episode, which I thought was interesting, and it's Ozzy and Kelly are talking about the lip ring again. It's very much the kind of like the lip ring is the symptom for the root cause, but because it's the thing that can be pointed at and talked about, everyone is kind of talking about it, trying to get at to the what's going on with Kelly. Sarah is here, and Ozzy and Kelly are talking about it. Ozzy points to Sarah, and he's like, well, I'm sure she thinks it's fucking rad. And of course, Ozzy is suggesting that, like, Sarah is the influence here, and that's what's going on. Through the rest of the episode, Kelly starts complaining more and more about feeling sick regularly, and no one can figure out what's going on. And they do think that, like, for this, in one moment, they're like, well, do you have a stomach bug? Do you have this? Kelly's like, maybe it's hepatitis. Ozzy at one point calls up Sharon. She's at the studio getting ready to film her talk show because she's still working on it at this point. Even though she did resign and quit, she had to finish out her contract. Called up Sharon at the talk show to talk about Kelly, which results in, by the end of the phone call, tears in Sharon's eyes, as Ozzy says she's definitely doing drugs and someone needs to do something about it. We get another scene where Kelly is at the hospital. She's called home to talk to Sharon to say they're doing some tests and to update her. Jack still thinks she's on drugs, and he tries to lay out all of the evidence to Sharon, but she's still kind of not wanting to hear it and kind of being in denial. Melinda shares the same concerns with Jack. I would point out here, editors love to do this, and sometimes it's effective, and sometimes it's just silly. They played White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane over a montage of some, like, nice Kelly moments from the show, and then every now and then they would throw in one of her rough moments, like when she's feeling sick or she's having this, like, wild, unpredictable behavior. And then the next thing we see is Kelly sort of being escorted by her family out to a car to go to rehab. And then we see Sharon and Ozzy in a different car calling someone to explain. It's like, okay, well, we just dropped off Kelly at rehab. That just happened. And now we're going to go be on Larry King. And our episode ends with Sharon calling Sarah's mom to try to talk a little bit about it. And it ends up Sharon just kind of going off instead and being like, you know what? Neither of you welcome into my home or around the family ever again. Sarah's the reason that Kelly has gotten into drugs and all these things. And Sharon's like, and you know what? You're not much better. So that's where the episode ends. We pick up in the 5th episode called 28 Days Later. Both probably a direct reference to the movie of the same name, but what some people may not know is that's also a reference to, like, how long you're kind of supposed to be in a rehab program. About a month, 28 days. Kelly's still at rehab, but she's not adjusting to it well, is the focus of this episode. She's been calling the family, calling home, calling the assistants, and requesting luxuries to be sent for her. I need new money, I need new shoes, I need new clothes, I need this and that and whatever. Jack, this whole episode, I believe at this point, if I understand the timeline correctly, some of this footage was coming around the same time that Jack was celebrating his own year anniversary of his own sobriety from at least drugs, if not drugs and alcohol. And so there's a lot of, like, comparison, not only for Jack himself, comparing himself, like, Kelly's current experience in rehab through his own, but also for us as an audience to kind of compare and contrast the two and see what's going down. A lot of the episode is, of course, you know, Sharon, Ozzy, Melinda, Becca, one of their assistants, Jack. A lot of them are all agreed, like, Kelly isn't taking rehab seriously. She's just kind of there. She's not wanting to, like, put in the work and do the mental and emotional work on herself to figure out how is she going to be better when she gets out of rehab and she has access to things and she's exposed to the world and these temptations again. Jack, having been in rehab before, you know, his stance is very much like, listen, you got to do it. You got to get through it. If you don't do it properly, it's not going to be helpful. And every time that someone's like, well, should we appease Kelly? Jack's like, no. And you're stupid for thinking that. By the end of the episode, we get Kelly back. She's around again. There were a few times that she really pushed and tried to get out. Sharon even at one point attempted to hear Kelly out for getting, like, a private therapist to work with Kelly so she could, like, do her rehab from home if she agreed to do 90 days of daily meetings with this therapist. And Jack's like, nope, that's stupid. That's not going to work. But we finally get Kelly home at the end, and she has new rules on her, which she complains about, of course, being 20 years old and having a 10:30 curfew. There is an attempt here for Kelly to try to kind of reclaim some of her own agency in what's happened to herself, in that she tries to talk to Sharon about Sharon's kind of behavior and tendency to be overly critical, specifically of, like, Kelly. We don't see that as much with Jack, at least what we're shown in the show, but she's very critical all the time of Kelly. What's Kelly doing? What's Kelly wearing? How is she acting? How is she behaving? What is she saying? And part of this, I think, stems from the fact that briefly Sharon was acting as Kelly's manager for her music and acting career. And then they finally kind of had to switch that around because it was not working out well for either of them. But you can definitely tell that Sharon still has the tendencies, not only because she's trying to be a mom and try to make sure that Kelly is like doing the right thing, but also she still has these kind of momager tendencies that come out kind of automatically. And Kelly tries to confront her about this and be like, Mom, you got to chill out. Sharon really needs to like cool it on that. But you can tell Sharon just doesn't take it seriously, doesn't really take it to heart. And I bring that up because I think it will come back into play later in the season. And I'll just point out, now we're halfway through the season. Like, what have we seen? Ozzy's Insomniac, Jack got a tattoo, they planned a trip, Kelly got a role, they went on Hawaii and it was weird. And then Kelly started, we had to confront Kelly's drug habits and then her going to rehab. And I will say that's kind of the peak for the season, I think. Everything afterwards, it kind of feels a little downhill, and I thought there was going to be a big episode at the end. I was really excited for it because I knew it was coming, and that final episode that I'll get into was not as entertaining or as cool as I thought it was going to be. Episode 6 is called Charity Case. This episode is focused on Sharon and Kelly wanting to do something good. They want to give back in some way. It can be hard to tell where this motivation is coming from, but I kind of believe it for sure when I hear Kelly trying to be like, I want to do something good, especially coming out of the rehab. That might be something she's trying to like divest her energy into so that she's not tempted to get back into the drug party life and circles and things. If she can put energy elsewhere, you know, it'll keep her focus on that instead. But it actually, this episode starts with Kelly discovering she's been booked a trip to Africa. She's with one of the assistants, and they're like, do you know about this? And Kelly's like, no. Turns out it's a charity thing for Oxfam or Red Cross that Sharon and Kelly are both going to go on. Kelly's like, you know what? I'll do it. Sure. And that's honestly, Kelly's kind of always been that way. You call her out, and she's like, no, I'll do it. Prove you wrong. Kelly also, unfortunately, she tries to break it to Sharon. She's like, I'm rough enough for it, but I don't think Sharon is. Ozzy really doesn't want them to go. He keeps saying they're going to get like held for ransom once the people for whichever country in Africa they're in figure out who they are and that they're celebrities, or they're going to get bitten by some horrible insect and catch a wild disease. And later Ozzy just tries to convince like, Kelly, I think it's great you wanted to do charity. How about you start locally? Can you do something at home in the States, you know? And later, Sharon has a meeting with people from Oxfam talking about the experience in Africa. And there's something she was prepared for, of course. Like, they were trying to explain to her, okay, you'll have to get all these inoculations and these vaccines to prepare. You'll have to take regular malaria pills while you're over there. And Sharon's like, okay, I can do that. And then they were trying to explain, like, listen, it's going to be rough. Like, while you're staying in Africa, there's not, like, the nicest of accommodations. But they were trying to explain to her, like, at the end, something they kind of do with the volunteers is take them somewhere to treat them for a few days to kind of recover and help them out. And Sharon makes a comment. She's like, okay, well, first we need to find a 5-star hotel. And then from there on out, Africa's now out of the picture. They're not going to Africa anymore. The other brief little plot that happens in this episode, before I get into the back half of the episode, is that Elton John shows up to the house while they were out. He's kind of just hanging out at the house for a little while, plays around on the piano. It's nice to see Elton John on a reality TV show like this. He's just there to go shopping with the family. He kind of takes them on a shopping spree, buys them a couple things. It was cute. It's cute to see the relationships the family has with other celebrities and public figures when they happen, especially when they're nice relationships. The back half of this episode is sort of a gala charity auction event. Sharon is receiving an award, the Platinum Dove Award. I did not write down what organization this is for. It was some local event that supports, like, fostered and unhoused youth in the area. I remember that. But they're going to this charity auction. They're all going there. It's nice. Jack is running late the whole time. And maybe he did make it, but the way the episode is edited is that he never actually showed up. By the time he got ready and left the house, the event was wrapping up. While they're at the event, because it's a charity auction, one of the prizes that is auctioned off is a puppy. And if you've watched the show, you kind of already knew where this is going because they've had so many pets and animals in this family, in this like house, and there's a constant point of conflict for all of them. And of course you see a new puppy and it's like, oh no. Kelly decides to start bidding for it, but she loses the bidding war with someone else for the puppy, which is fine. At least Kelly knows when to fold. But as if by intervention from a higher power, the person who won the bid for the puppy decides to gift it and donate it to Kelly at the end of the night. And so the episode ends with the dog being brought home, and who knows how many days later, Ozzy's already yelling about it and already over another dog being in the house. Episode 7 is called Number One Fan. The Osbournes wiki, like the fandom wiki, said that many fans consider this to be the worst in the series. I didn't think it was that bad, and I honestly didn't think it lived up to that hype. I think people blew it out of proportions, and people just are too weak when it comes to secondhand embarrassment and watching people do things that they find cringy. I have been working on training myself to not cringe at things, and honestly having a reality TV show podcast helps out a lot with that, because I have a podcast which is already kind of cringy, and it's about reality TV, which you tell people you watch a bunch of reality TV as a hobby to then talk about it online. You get rid of that behavior pretty quickly. Number One Fan. The whole concept, we actually open up with some of Sharon at her talk show. She informs the audience of her show, and then we get the same information by watching it, that she did an auction for a charity that sponsors children in Uganda, and the top donor, Laura, donated $20,100. So Sharon invited her to spend the day with her and the family, and I guess in part also then film an episode of The Osbournes and be part of the show. Laura is, just for some information, 25 years old, huge Ozzy Osbourne fan, and she went into debt on her credit cards to be able to take out this much money to donate it for this opportunity. So that's who we're working with. Honestly, I think most fans just didn't like her behavior and how kind of over the moon she was, and got cringy at her. There was some speculation that Laura was actually completely fake and that she was an actor that was sent in so they could do this episode, but she herself has spoken about doing the episode, and she's like, no, I'm a real person. That was my real behavior that you saw. Laura's excited. She's all over the house. She's just amazed at everything. She's awestruck the whole time. Gets them to autograph some things, and just finds everything so cool. Gets to see the studio that Ozzy does his music in. She also shares at one point that she is a singer, songwriter, performer herself. Her stage name is Laura Dark Praise Star. Love it. Unironically love it. Love her energy. And she is, of course, wearing an Ozzy Osbourne shirt this whole time. She does some singing for Sharon and Ozzy and some of the others, which you can definitely tell is who knows if a production member kind of prompted her to do that, or if it was just it got brought up naturally, and then Sharon, out of being nice, was like, sure, I'll listen to you sing. Because Sharon has that kind of wise PR sensibility, where when she's in this kind of charity mode, you can tell a very nice front personality is coming out. And it's made off, of course, to be a cringy moment because Laura she can't hold a tune that well, all these things. But she's also, I'm sorry, if her stage name is Dark Praise Star, and she'd also point out that she loves heavy metal and she's been working on her growl. The music she's singing is not going to sound good if you're doing it a cappella. So give Laura some benefit of the doubt. By the end of the episode, Sharon feels so bad about Laura going into debt just to be able to do this thing. She delivers pizzas. That's her job. She lives in Wisconsin. Not much going on for her. So Sharon decides to gift Laura back $10,000 from her own at the end of the whole thing to help her out for that. The other focus of this episode is Jack got a speeding ticket and he has to do online safety driving school, which he just doesn't want to do and doesn't take seriously. So Amanda and then later Becca, two of the assistants for the family, are helping him get through it and do it all. And the way they edit it, I think Amanda at one point says they have 2 days to do it, and it looks like they did split up completing it over 2 days, because I think Jack is in a different outfit at one point. But the way they edit it, they fully pieced it out through the entire episode, so it looks like it literally just took, like, so long for them to do this whole thing. And it probably didn't. But that's the editing of the show. They're usually pretty good at that. Episode 8, it's called Lost in Translation, with a Z in Lost because of Oz. In this episode, the family is going to Japan because Ozzy is receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award, and the ceremony is in Japan for some reason. I think it was part of MTV even. And Kelly is going there because her album is finally being released in Japan, so she's there to do some minor publicity for the album, take some photos, do some PR. So everyone goes to Japan for this trip, which I was surprised by. Jack is there, and even Sam, Ozzy's bodyguard and friend, who we learn in this episode is Japanese. Sam gets his own little subplot, which is really, really cute and precious, and I love that they included this in the show, probably because the other stuff the family was doing probably wasn't that interesting. Like, Kelly goes to an office to do the magazine photo shoot, which is interesting that the magazine she holds in the photo with, like, the, I guess the people who work for the magazine that she took, like, in the office, has Burt McCracken's face on it, which was her boyfriend from the start of season 2. So, that was funny to see that. But Sam, we get his little plot. He's preparing to see his aunt and uncle who live in Japan. He hasn't seen them in who knows how long. They don't speak any English, and Sam doesn't speak any Japanese. So he's trying to pick up some Japanese, either from like a cousin or a local translator, so that he can try to say a few things in Japanese. We go with him. It's nice that he kind of like let the cameras come with him, because he definitely probably didn't have to do that. We go with him to see his aunt and uncle and some of his cousins for the first time. It's a little awkward, it's like kind of like extended family that you've never seen, and then also there's a language barrier. But it's nice to see. Sam brings them and lets them all meet the Osbourne family and mostly Ozzy, because I think at least one of the cousins was like a huge fan, that was cute. That was cool. Ozzy gets his award, and then it's time to go back to the U.S. The only other remarkable thing about this episode, I watched it with one of my roommates who had never seen the show before, and she pointed out every single time that they did a panning shot of the Four Seasons hotel they were staying in, which was at least 4 times. They just showed us the like entrance to the hotel, and which took like 4 or 5 seconds. So they did that 4 or 5 times in the episode. And then, of course, because they're in Japan, all the backing music in the episode was this kind of like traditional Japanese music, played over stuff, and we heard like random gong noises. You know how 2004, 2005 show editing would be when they would handle something like this. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go watch Next Top Model. The last 4 episodes of literally any season, when they take the contestants abroad and then have them do like culturally relevant challenges. Episode 9 is called The Show Must Go Oz, or The Show Must Go Off. I'm actually not sure, because I think the title card and the episode title are different. The focus of this episode is that Sharon's talk show has finally come to an end. She's finished out her contract, or she was getting near to the end of it, and now that she's finally done with this ordeal, which she thought was fun at the beginning and then quickly turned sour on it because of how she was treated by the production company and the people who were the bigwigs for running the show, she's trying to finally stick it to them. She's getting snippy, she's having attitude, she's making all these like diva demands, which is funny and really entertaining. Telling them, no, I'm not going to show up at 3, I'll be there at 7. Yeah, I'd like the rest of my payment for the show up front, please, or I will not be doing any of the remaining episodes. Just having her way, being as bad as she can. It's nice to see an episode where Sharon gets to pull that side of her out. In season 1, one of the most fun episodes is when Sharon has a war with her neighbors, and you get to see this kind of like mischievous trickster character of Sharon come out of her. It's very entertaining. They're packing up the show. She's trying to like steal stuff from the company, And then for the rest of the episode, the next little piece, now that Sharon's done with the show, she's around the house all the time again. She gets to spend all this time doing something. So we get a little montage of her bothering and pestering everyone else in the family over the mansion intercom. We'll be like hanging out with Jack in his room and a friends, and all of a sudden Sharon's just calling up like, Jack, come hang out with me, and doing the same to Ozzy, doing the same to Kelly. Sharon then also goes on a shopping spree. For some reason, she can just do that. She gets a new Bentley. I think she got some jewelry. She got a robotic toilet. That was a huge focus here. Everyone was like, whoa. Jack appears to have maybe broken the robotic toilet. The last two things we get in this episode is Ozzy going back to the dentist. They felt the need to show us that for like 2 minutes. And then Kelly has a brief moment again where she's complaining about how often Sharon is critical of her and makes these comments towards her very regularly. And she even tells the assistant Becca that she actually just doesn't want to live at the house anymore because of how bad this is. The final episode of The Osbournes and of Season 4, Episode 10, is called A Farewell to Oz. Phil McGraw is here at the house, and he's here to kind of do his thing that he normally does on his show. I refuse to call him doctor, by the way, as someone with a doctorate, and as friends who are like medical doctors or becoming medical doctors, refuse to call Dr. Phil a doctor. Phil McGraw, or Phil, is here, and he's going to do his thing. He's going to kind of do his weird, like, half therapizing, asking them questions, which, you know, to some extent, as much as I'm not a huge fan of him, he is kind of the best personality to be able to put people in their place and ask them these kind of questions. Just his kind of overall vibe, like the timbre of his voice, the way he asks these questions, the way he looks, and the way he looks at people, and like his body language is very good for confronting people on their bullshit, I will say. I would lie if there hasn't been, every now and then, a Phil McGraw clip compilation that I have enjoyed. But part of that is also that kind of like, you're watching the other people be put down, and that's where you're getting the enjoyment out of it. You're not actually really reveling in Phil McGraw's ability to do his job well in that case. You're more looking at the misery of the other people. Anyway, this episode, you can tell it was filmed a while later. Everyone has different looks going on. Jack has grown this, like, strange facial hair ring. You know when it's, like, the mustache that then connects down to, like, a goatee? But it's just the ring around the mouth. That's what he has going on. You can tell he's trying something new. And it's a little bit time has passed. I don't know how far later this was filmed. Because, like I said, I do believe everything for Season 4 was filmed at the same time as Season 3, and then editing cut it up into 2 distinct seasons. And then this was clearly something that happened later. Sharon, in an interview at one point, spoke and said that they had Phil come in because it would be a good kind of final thing for the show, but also it gave the family an opportunity to address some of the common criticisms that they received from the public, as Phil McGraw being sort of a mouthpiece for the public and what they've been saying, but also his own perspective on it as well. And so Phil is here really to talk about them as a family unit, and the experiences of each of the individual members in their life so far, their relationships, and not so much like the idea and the concept of being reality TV stars. Phil is more, again, focusing on what if, instead of me coming to them, what if they were just another family on his show? How would he try to help them realize things and ask them and get them to, like, work through things together and be a little introspective? So he starts by just saying it plainly: everyone calls you the most dysfunctional family in America, which of course opens some dialogue where Ozzy is like, well, okay, but what is a functional family? You know, Ozzy says he thinks as long as your family is one that survives, you're doing fine. Phil goes on to ask the family, does their family thrive on crisis? Do they need the drama? And he's trying to talk to them a little bit about how atypical their like family setup is, and he's really focusing on the experiences of Kelly and Jack for a large part of their discussion. He's trying to talk to them about like the kids didn't have like a normal, typical childhood, having to move around so much and move so often. Kelly attempts to counter this by saying, well, there's no such thing as normal. The minute you try to start setting things as normal, that's just because you're looking to categorize a group of people or other things as not normal. It's very interesting how like the family usually tries to push back on Phil, but because he's Phil, he's just not gonna let him. He pokes at them a little bit about the language usage, and how did you decide where the standard was where you held them to? Sharon here takes some responsibility for not reining everyone in when she should have, and just in general not providing enough like structure for the kids. And Ozzy brings up how him and Sharon don't even really make like decisions together. They make decisions for themselves and sometimes for the others without really consulting each other. Phil then directs it to them two specifically as well, and asks if Sharon and Ozzy, if they think they've taught the kids the appropriate lessons they need to learn while growing up, and if they haven't, is it too late? Jack and Kelly are only in their like very young, burgeoning adult years, 19, 20-ish. Kelly cuts in because she wants to say something, and she thinks, the only thing that your parents can teach you is right from wrong, and she thinks that Sharon and Ozzy have successfully done that. Something I haven't like brought up yet, but this episode also serves in part to be a clip show, which is where they just sort of show montage of scenes from the series, and in this case we got like all 4 seasons dumped in here. So for example, when Phil was talking to them about language, we got a clip show of like a bunch of swearing. When Kelly makes this comment about I think my parents have taught me right from wrong, then it shows a montage of all the times Kelly and Jack have made bad decisions, or even Sharon and Ozzy have made bad decisions. So it's one of those kind of like, the juxtaposition is here for a point of someone saying something and then we're going to show you the opposite. But also because it's the last episode of the whole show, it does serve as a clip show, a recap of a kind, if you will. Kind of ends this discussion. He focuses on the future, asks Sharon and Ozzy where they think Jack and Kelly will be in 5 years, and Sharon's big thing is she says, you know what, I just want them to be doing whatever makes them happy. And Phil caps everything off by saying, despite being extremely dysfunctional, he can clearly tell that this is a clearly very loving family. Which is one of my points that I've talked about in one of the earlier seasons of the show, and one of my episodes of the podcast, is that like this family, despite being so different, they have a lot of the very similarities that like every family should and typically does have. And it's like, even if they're all chaotic and they're yelling at each other, they all clearly come around with each other later on in the end, and they support each other, and they're there for each other. That was the final episode. Like, what a weird ending to me. It really felt like it was just kind of thrown at the end. The episode itself also just ends abruptly. Every other episode of the series had kind of like a nice concluding cap off to the episode. This one just kind of stopped, and then we went to credits, and it was silent. That was the weird part, was it was just quiet. The whole rest of the show was loud all the time. The big thing I want to say about this season is, how can you tell when a show should just be done? How do you know when it's time to wrap it up, put it away, never come back to it, don't reboot it, we're done. And I think in this season you could kind of tell that the family was also ready to be done. I think Sharon spoke about that in an interview. I'm sure I could go find where probably Jack or Kelly said similar things, but I know I found an interview where Sharon said, like, we were kind of over it, filming all the time, you don't have any sense of privacy, and they were ready to be done with that. But also Jack and Kelly in particular were legally adults now, and they were going off and getting ready to go do their own things. Kelly had a burgeoning music and acting career, and Jack was wanting to work sort of in the backside of the music industry, working in like management and production and label stuff. But not only could I tell that the show was becoming a little bit annoying for the family as the focus and the cast members, but also you could tell that like the editing team was having a difficult time. I reiterate again, we had a whole episode in this season where the main plot was just the family arguing on where to go on vacation. And it wasn't like that interesting, So you could tell that kind of the editors have gotten to a point where, they were editing specifically for entertainment and for comedy. They were not necessarily trying to tell like a chronological story in any of the seasons, except for every now and then the sort of paired two-parter episodes, like Kelly going to rehab for this season. And in the most part, it worked. It doesn't mean you have to kind of like watch this show in a different way than you would watch maybe a different celebrity family show. But just like when a joke has gone on for too long, or you're trying to stretch it into something else to be funny and it's just not working, I think that's what kind of happened here. The earlier seasons, they had a lot more content that they could more easily make into something comedic and entertaining. And as the show went on, as the kids lost interest and they were moving up onto their own things and becoming adults, and as Sharon and Ozzy changed as well, although not in as drastic of ways, they kind of just ran out of stuff that was like easily entertaining. It's why I could definitely see why they would then want to make an episode, for example, out of a huge fan who Sharon has offered to hang out with for a day, and turn that into a whole focus of an episode for the show. Because it is just something different. We're putting them in a different situation. Everything else that they kind of did this season, even the rehab to an extent was familiar to them, even though it was new to Kelly, because Jack had gone to rehab before, and Ozzy had tried to go to rehab before. So, for them, they're used to dealing with that. They're used to both personally and externally, dealing with press and the image and whatnot. But, there's not a lot of, new situations that the family was in that was super entertaining. They went to Japan, they went to Hawaii. They'd been to Hawaii before. I'm sure they'd been to Japan before. You could tell us that the content they did use, the reactions aren't as big. Even Kelly had started to, mellow out as she aged, compared to where she was in season 1. I don't even think Jack and Kelly had a fight, really, at all this season, except for them maybe arguing a little bit about when she was in rehab, and her needing to go through it properly rather than take shortcuts. That's the Osbournes. The whole season's done. I think I'll make another special episode kind of retrospectively talking about the entire show. I don't want to include that here. I don't want this episode to go on for way too long. But I do want to talk about what happens to the family next. All 4 of them had pretty big media careers. As the family themselves, they went on to try to have a variety show on Fox called The Osbournes Reloaded, but the first episode was so unremarkable that the other 5 episodes that were recorded were never aired. There was another show later called Battle for Ozfest, which was a talent competition for bands to participate in to win a spot at the Ozfest tour that Sharon had started back in 96 and went on through 2007, I believe. They would later come together and watch the first 2 seasons of this show with a comedian whose name I've forgotten hosting them to make the Osbournes The Basement Tapes, which is them watching and reacting to the show and talking about not only the show, but kind of their experiences in general. Allegedly, The Basement Tapes was the first time that any of them except for Jack had actually sat down to really watch this show, which I don't know if I believe that. I have to believe at least Sharon had seen some of it before then. But I would definitely believe Kelly and Ozzy had never watched the show up until making The Basement Tapes. Ozzy and Jack would go on to do Ozzy and Jack's World Detour, where they go on a road trip together and they participate in a lot of adventures, which is a nice little show to watch, and I'll probably come to it someday. Jack also had just a ton of reality shows of his own, with his name in all of them. Adrenaline Junkie, where he documented his experience, I believe, losing a bunch of weight and getting really healthy. And then he also has Celebrity Adrenaline Junkie, where I believe he did the same thing with celebrities. We had a show called Fearless, Jack Osbourne's Night of Terror. Those are all just adventures he went on. Jack did a show with Ozzy and Sharon later on called The Osbournes Want to Believe, where Jack kind of presented them with, not like conspiracy theories, but like the paranormal stuff, and tried to convince them, or all of them tried to see if they believed in it. Sharon had a bunch of like guest spots on tons of things, for example, Days of Our Lives, Will and Grace. She became eventually a regular judge on The X Factor and America's Got Talent for many, many seasons. And then, of course, she was one of the co-hosts of The Talk for 11 seasons. Where if you've ever heard anything about Sharon Osbourne outside of this other stuff, you'd probably heard that was the show where she defended Piers Morgan on, which was an interesting decision. And then Kelly, she had quite a number of TV projects and movies. Of course, she was in Life as We Know It, as we heard about in this season. But she also, and I didn't know this, she was in, like, The Muppets Wizard of Oz. I believe she co-hosted or presented I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here Now. She was on The Talk, Project Catwalk, Fashion Police, Dancing with the Stars one season, Project Runway Jr., Australia's Got Talent. She's done a ton of guest judging stuff. Like her and Sharon are both on RuPaul's Drag Race. And Kelly had also guest spotted on like America's Next Top Model and Jane by Design and a few other things. So they would all go on, of course, to have these kind of interestingly extensive media careers entirely because of this show. As Sharon has pointed out in a number of interviews, and it's something that I like to come back to think about the show, is that before it, everyone knew Ozzy, but afterwards everyone knew the other three of them as well. But that was season 4, and now finally the end of the show of The Osbournes. Not a long episode for the podcast, not super deep, but then again, neither was this season. It's an okay watch it if you're wanting to watch the show for completion, but if you're wanting to just watch it to see if you'd like it, I'd say watch seasons 1 and 2 in that order. And if you're wanting to show it to other people, they can just get by with only seeing seasons 1 and 2, and then the highlights of 3 and 4, which for this season I would say would be the 2 episodes focused on Kelly, of the drug problem, and then her experience in rehab, and then the biggest fan episode, and then if you really want to, the episode with Phil. So, thanks for listening. This has been the recap episode. Please, it would help out me and the show if you would like and follow the show on your preferred podcast platforms. You can also follow me on social media, on Instagram at The Recap Episode, or on YouTube at The Recap Episode Pod. I am thinking about doing a ranking of every single episode of The Osbournes as a video on YouTube, so be on the lookout for that if you'd like to see me rank all 52 episodes, see which ones I thought were the best and which ones I thought were the worst and which ones I thought were just middling. That's it for The Osbournes. I'm going to go hop on that crazy train